So I'm here in Costa Rica with Evelyn. She and I have had a couple of conversations about mobilization. She is from Honduras and she's worked there. She's worked in the States with churches as well, and she's mobilized a lot of missionaries. And so I think we're going to have an interesting conversation. And we have lots of birds around because we're in a lovely setting. So Evelyn, we talked last time and I said, okay, let's take out race and language, right? Those are obvious factors. Trying to get to some of the less obvious factors as to what are the challenges of mobilizing Latinos. Like, what are the challenges that they have to overcome that might be unique to them? So what do you think some of those things are?
Yeah, so I think last time I mentioned that there was an understanding, especially in Latino culture, that, missionaries are basically either white Americans or Europeans. Not just necessarily because historically they've been white. I mean, it's still like the majority of missionaries that we receive from the U.S. and Europe are just white Americans. So that's our ingrained understanding.
So even presently.
Yeah. I think that, in fact, during the last 2-3 weeks, we've received about 3 teams, and they've all been white. 2 teams from Norway, which obviously, they're Europeans, and then 1 team from Canada, 1 team from the U.S., and still pretty white majority.
So how does that image influence just your average Latino Christian, or maybe the next tier that's thinking about, missions is this important thing for the church?
Well, I think it influences in 2 ways. One, we assume, okay, so then missions is not for me. Just, from what I see, the color of their skin, they speak English, they have influence, they come from powerful nations per se, and we think we don't have that, so why would I go? The second one is that people assume that, having lived in the States, I know that this is not necessarily true, but people assume that Americans and Europeans are loaded, basically, that they're rich, and because they're rich, they can come on these trips that are really expensive, especially a 1-week trip that might cost you $3,000. Not everyone can afford that, right?
Yeah.
So that is another factor that it influences our understanding of finances in the kingdom. That we as coming from developing nations would not be able to participate in these really expensive trips that we wouldn't be able to afford. And so those are 2 things that I still see pretty frequently, that these ideas have been drilled in us for so long that it's just a concept that we've just kind of been okay with lately, especially. So in the discipleship training school that I'm currently leading, I have 5 Costa Rican students and 2 Costa Rican staff members. And even though the staff members, for example, they have already gone on several mission trips, and they know and they have this concept that God is their provider, there is still a big struggle of, I don't know if I'll be able to make it. The Lord will probably provide for the rest, but I don't know if He'll provide for me.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not outspoken, but it's what I see. And with the students especially, because it's their first time being exposed to something of the sort, it's definitely very much in fact, I remember one student telling me at the beginning, I'm okay if I don't go. And I said, I never want to hear you say that again, because I am trusting the Lord to provide for you, so you better start trusting yourself, because if you're not, you can just leave. But I remember the fear in their eyes of, I don't know that He will. And much of it has to do, with their backgrounds. They don't feel like they have a big support system that is actually going to help them provide. In our understanding of culture here in Central America, you should work for what you want, whether it's a trip or car or house or whatever, it is shameful to ask for money. It is shameful to beg, which many people understand missions and fundraising for missions as begging. And so one of the first things that we had to do is to change people's understanding of what is it that we're doing. And I told them, we're not begging. You're not begging. You're asking people to participate in what the Lord is doing. And granted, we could go into like the really churchy, ooh, God is partnering with us, and, you know, try to make it sound really good and whatever. But it really had to do a lot with changing their understanding of, you're not begging, you're really asking them to partner with you, to participate in the kingdom, to sow in the kingdom, and they will also reap what you sow. But it's been a process of, I mean, for us, it's been about 11 weeks of walking with them and telling them, like, you're not begging, you are inviting people, you are doing a lot of hard work, you're about to go do a lot of hard work when you go out. And I think that for many of them, it's still a challenge, and they're still learning. And, you know, obviously, we're like Israel, who sees the Lord open the Dead Sea, and then the next day we're complaining because we have no meat.
Right.
So that's just part of our nature. But
yeah, I think I understand how, you know, being down here, all people see is perpetually staffed teams coming down, and they don't understand, even for many North Americans. You know, when they hear $3,000 trip, a lot of them immediately go through the same thing of, well, my parents taught me don't beg, and I can't make that money, so this is not for me. Granted, there's plenty of people who either figure out how to fundraise or can write a check.
Yeah, and even like another challenge is that in the States, let's say trip for $3,000. So for example, the discipleship training school, it's for an American, it's about $6,000 total, including the 3-month training part and the 3-month outreach part. So it is a lot of money, but on the other hand, I know that you can work about a summer, like 6 months, save up, and you'll be fine. In Central America, that would take, well, I mean, Honduras, the minimum wage is $150 a month.
Wow.
Right? So
it's too early to do math, but that sounds like a long time that you'd have to work.
Yeah, so the additional challenge is higher. Because, I mean, not only it would be really hard to just work.
Right.
But if you're living, for example, on minimum wage, usually you have bills to take care of and stuff like that, where it's going to be, like, really, really hard to save up. So that is definitely an additional part of it, where our economy as countries is not great for stuff like this. But on the other hand, I think that a big deal has had to do with churches in Central America. We're fairly, even though it's not like Mexico, well, actually, I'm going to include Mexico in this. So Mexico and Central America, we are near enough, the United States especially, that we receive mission teams every summer, if not more than just the summer. My church in Honduras alone receives about 3 mission teams every summer. And with that, like, we have gotten really used to receiving. And it's this whole thing of, yes, come, we need more people, we need more help, we need more resources, we want to do better programs, we want to do better stuff. And for example, my church in Honduras, we have a lot of, like, social justice outreaches. So I'm not saying that we're just hoarding it amongst ourselves. We're reaching the community among us, which the community that my church is beside is like one of the poorest communities in Honduras, or in Tegucigalpa, in the capital. But still, we never think about sending out. And it's like we're just saying, come, bring, I need, I want, I'm dreaming of.
Right.
Which is great. I'm glad that my church has vision for the future and wants to reach out to more people and to the community to do a better job. But I also challenge them and I say, if we're only receiving, how are we really being the church? I mean, Jesus was very clear in saying, go out, like, go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth. But, I mean, part of it is, yes, Jerusalem, so let's do a good job there.
Mm-hmm.
But then we need to go.
Right.
Right? And so the church in Central America has done a very poor job in going, partly because we've received so much, but now we're just so used to it that even when we share with people in our own churches about mission, all they think of is, are you going to come back to us? Like, after you receive the training, will you come back to us? If not, we're not going to invest
brain
in
loss.
you.
Wow.
I have several friends here at YWAM who their church supported them as long as they were involved with their church, and that they promised that they would go back. But if, you know, in missions it's really hard to promise that because the Lord could call you somewhere else, to a different country.
Yeah, that's a complicated
And so how are you going to remain
dance.
involved? And you can't make these promises that you just can't keep. And we just learned that. And so most churches realize, oh, they're not coming back. I'm not going to continue investing in them. And even I have some friends who their churches said, you're going to leave? Have a good one. And that was it. And so there's like this very odd understanding of mission and the church and how we train people. And it seems like we train people for the sake of having them come back instead of understanding that discipleship is not about having people come back. In fact, it's having them go also.
Right.
Like freely receiving, freely giving.
Right.
So the church in Central America has this kind of skewed understanding of that. And that also influences how people come and do missions or how to mobilize them. Because, so to add the fact that, you know, your salary is not going to amount to much, your church is not going to support you. And many times it's not just that they don't support you financially, they like break ties with you at all.
Wow.
Which is rather unfortunate, because then you don't have a support group even for prayer that is so fundamental to going on mission, right?
It seems like that would kind of force you to latch on to outsiders, which would decrease the chances of you returning. It is kind of a self-perpetuating cycle.
Yeah, and so it's hard to find churches that have a different mindset. And granted, we want to serve the church. That is one of the things that we do here in YWAM. But on the other hand, it's really hard to work, sometimes going against the grain of, hey, bring your people, get them trained, but they might not necessarily come back to you. And we're not stealing them.
Right.
But the Lord might be calling them to the nations, and you have to be okay with that, right?
So they just need a bigger picture of the kingdom, really. Again, I mean, I think, obviously, all of these issues are impacting the Central American church in a unique and maybe heightened way. But we have the same kind of thing where people are afraid, oh, you're taking our best people, and then what?
Yeah.
We spend all this money, and then what?
Yeah, and then even you can get into all the denominational stuff, which gets even more...
We're not going to send our person to work with that other team because that doesn't have our brand on it, our label.
Or you guys are working with all the denominations, that means you must not believe in anything, right? So it starts getting even more tricky and more layers. But I think that those factors of fear, inferiority, and then the church not really being who we are called to be really affect the possibility of mobilizing people and of sending them out to the nations. Because the churches would say, yes, train my people, gladly, as long as they come back. But then, you know, when they don't come back, then it's a mess. Or the other thing is the inferiority complex that we feel of, we come from developing nations, they have more power, they have more influence, instead of realizing that in the kingdom of God, we're all made in His image. Therefore, we all have influence, and we all are able to bring the gospel to the nations. It's not just one or. In fact, I really try to encourage Latinos because, especially for example, in the 1040 window, it's easier for us to go. It's easier for me to fit in than for you to fit in.
Right. Absolutely.
Right? And that gives you influence, but people don't realize that. And maybe and especially because if you go to some countries, so I remember being in Thailand, and people were always like, "Ooh, the Americans," but it was kind of like they were wanting to get something from the white people, from the Caucasians that spoke Spanish. Whereas with me, I built relationships. I still have friends from there, like from a trip from 3 years ago.
Right.
My American friends had a really hard time, especially like white blonde. They just stood out so much.
It's just different. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think they have a similar experience that Latin America has, where their paradigm is it's the white missionary that comes and does for us. They come to do, and they don't have a box for you of some kind of historic pattern of, well, here's what Hondurans do when they come here. Yeah. Because there's probably not been that many Hondurans go there on mission.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, they never know where my country is, which is always a fun conversation of showing them in a map and whatever. But my skin color, hair color, I blend in a little bit just easier. Right. And granted, not every Central American looks like me. But there is, even in just saying that you're not from the States, it kind of like for example, in Thailand, it seemed like they felt like the playing field was leveled instead of feeling like America was here and Thailand was here to some regards. And so it opened doors for relationships for me that were way more easier than for the Americans who had to overcome the whole like political stuff or so many other layers of history, right? For me, I was so new. They had no grid. And so that's also interesting. And I think even for like going to the developing nations, when they hear of someone that comes from a developing nation, to them it opens up this world of opportunity. If they can do it, why can I not do it?
Right.
Which I love that. I mean, that's what I hope that people see in me. And I remember actually the reason I stayed in YWAM was because I met Central American missionaries. And that broke my paradigm. I lived in the States for 5.5 years, went to college, like had gone on a couple of mission trips, but in my mind, I couldn't be a missionary. I didn't realize that was an actual paradigm I had until I came to Costa Rica and I saw Central American missionaries loving their people, doing things well, and expanding the kingdom, living missionally, and I thought, wait, this is cool. This is what I want, or what I've been hoping for. I didn't even know I could do it. And so when I met them and I saw what they were doing, it just blew my mind. And so the hope is that as people see Honduran in missions, one of the most violent countries in the world, one of the poorest countries in the world too, then people will say, I can be a part of God's kingdom also and be part of the mission. Instead of thinking, well, I don't know that the Lord's going to provide for me. But rather, if he provided for a Honduran,
right,
like he can provide for you.
Right.
And so, yeah.
So, I think, it's easy for me as a North American to kind of view everything in terms of dollars, and to hear, one of their barriers is that they don't have money. And so when I think, well, what's my role? I think, well, how can I help them raise funds? But I think even in that, like that attitude can, while it might help a few people temporarily, it might also continue to instill over the Latin American church that they're not enough, and it doesn't disciple them to take on that role of kind of self-propagation, where they are sending their own missionaries and funding their own missionaries. And so I guess maybe the question is, how can the northern churches, let's just call it that way, help the southern churches, so the global south churches? Because I think your experience as a Latina from Honduras is probably similar to, someone coming from Nigeria or from Thailand or from any other countries, whether they're even developing or not. It's just their paradigm is so much that, well, it's, Christianity is this Western dominated enterprise. So then What do you think, partnership and that kind of thing needs to look like with the North and the South as they go forward on mission?
Well, I think that something that's very important is for both the North and the South to realize that Christianity is no longer a northern thing. The majority church is not there anymore. It's in Latin America, it's in Africa, it's in Asia, right? It's not the Western church anymore that is actually even... most of missionaries are not being sent by the States anymore. Brazil is doing a great job at sending people out.
South Korea.
South Korea is doing an amazing job. And there are some African countries that are doing an amazing job as well. I mean, I'm really bad with numbers and statistics, so I wouldn't be able to tell you, but the Global South is doing an excellent job. In fact, we're sending out missionaries to the States, to Europe, to the countries that were traditionally known as the Christian countries, right? So I think that there has to be a shift in both. Not for the South to say we're dominating, but rather for both areas to work together.
Right.
Because as much as I don't necessarily want the American church, for example, to impose, I still want to learn from them. There's so many things that you guys have that are worth learning from. Thousands of years of tradition, of teachers, of knowledge, of things. But also, I think it's important for the North to learn from us. And we also have traditions, and we also have part of a different understanding of like God's kindness and His goodness, and even worship. And one of my favorite things is, for example, to do worship within different cultures and to see how the Lord is glorified through our languages, our dances, our music, right? So I think that there has to be a shift of understanding, like, it's not about dominating, it's not about who sends the most,
right,
but rather of how we can keep on partnering with each other to expand the kingdom. Because at the end of the day, the kingdom of God is just upside down, right? It's this thing that's completely different.
It doesn't make human sense.
Not at all. Where, a Honduran can walk alongside an American and go expand the kingdom of God in Costa Rica. It's weird, but it's great. So I think that having that shift is going to be important, especially for us to see each other as always made in the image of God. So the Honduran or the American, neither of us is like more important than the other, but rather we're partnering together.
Yeah. And
I really like that word, to partner, because it reminds me of God with Adam and Eve in the garden. And we have this skewed understanding that work was after the fall, when really God asked them to tend the land before the fall.
Right.
But what He asked of them was to partner with Him, like to name the animals. Right. He already created them. We got to name them. And so it's similar with mission. Like the Lord is at work everywhere. It's not that, I'm going to go to, let's say, Mozambique because He's never been there. It's not true.
He owns it all.
But He makes an invitation to me that I can go and partner with Him in what He is doing, right?
So, on that note, a friend of mine has summarized this succinctly, where he said, in the colonial era of missions, it was the Europeans and the Americans, we had the power, we make the rules. And then as different countries gained independence and fought wars and whatnot, there was kind of this reaction against that, where the national churches said, well, we have the power now, we make the rules. And what you're talking about is what he calls it a brotherhood era, where you just say family era of, it's, we walk hand in hand, and Christ is the head of the church, and He makes the rules, and, we serve Him. So, you talk about, the Latin American church has received so much, and because of this, it hasn't instilled a pattern of giving. It's just kind of set the expectation of, well, it's just our job to kind of host them and let them come help us reach our neighborhood. I was watching you and the other teams last night trying to buy tickets. And, of course, every time I come down here or talk with any bilingual or Spanish speakers, I try to highlight the need that we have in the North for missionaries from Latin America to come, especially to my city.
Yeah.
You know, we have that group, Islam and Spanish, and our city's 40% Hispanic.
Yeah.
And so I realized, you know, me trying to reach them, there's again those same obvious barriers that I would face coming down here trying to mobilize. I would face those even in my own, even in my own hometown. And you know, I guess I've had this sort of glib or naive, if you will, view that, well, I just keep coming down here enough, and eventually, like, somebody's gonna hear that and catch a vision to come up to Houston and work with them. And then I watched y'all buy tickets, and just seeing where, you know, I think one of the plans routed y'all through Serbia, and like 10 other stops on one. Like, I've never seen a ticket.
Yeah.
That, I mean, unless you were trying to route through that many stops, like travel hacking or something, that routed through so many places. So, what do you think some of the challenges would be? I mean, again, finances, we've thrown that one on there now, but what were some of the other challenges of Latinos coming to the States or to Europe to actually help with the growing Spanish-speaking populations there?
Well, I mean, even the first one, for example, say in the States, because Europe is different, is visas. Getting a visa for the United States as a Central American is really hard. You have to prove that you have a certain status, that you have certain assets, and that you have certain amount of money in your bank account, that you are employed, that you are not going to stay there, which is understandable. I mean, the United States is trying to prevent people from migrating illegally. I understand that. But on the other hand, it just makes it really, really hard for anyone. So for us as, for example, YWAM here in San Jose, we have never been able to say, let's send an outreach team to the United States, because we're almost certain that we're not going to get visas for most of the Latinos that would be in the team.
Yeah.
And so that is a major challenge in itself, because we would love to go, for example, partner with you and what your church is doing, but we can't.
Right.
Even for a transit visa, you still have to apply through the same way, and you're likely
so what
to
is
get
what is a
denied.
transit visa? Probably most people that are watching this have never needed one and don't know what it is.
So a transit visa...
No, I learned this last night.
Yeah, would literally be just, I need to go through Houston and switch planes at Houston. So for example, actually my team, we're traveling, 4 of us that actually can go into the United States are traveling through Los Angeles. So in order to enter the United States, even if you're just making a connection at the airport, you need a visa. So even if you're never going to leave that airport, even if you're only going to get off the plane, switch to another plane, you need to apply, and the cost of applying is about $300. You have to have purchased your ticket beforehand, and you're not guaranteed that you will receive the transit visa.
So if you don't get the visa, you're just out the ticket price then.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, for example, like something that is so simple, it's still complicated.
Yeah, very complicated.
So, for Europe, it's a little bit easier. Most European countries, except for the UK, are pretty easy as long as you have a return ticket within 90 days. You can be there within 90 days, and it works totally fine. We send outreaches to Europe every so often. They're hard outreaches, in my opinion. I would rather go sleep on the ground at a church in the bush in Uganda than be in Paris.
Why is that?
Because people are very closed off in Paris or other parts of Europe. So you have to even go with a different mentality. Like, you're not going to go and immediately just pray for people and do stuff like that. Even relationships seem harder to be built because people are less trustworthy or less trusting of Christians. And, they see us as somewhat dumb and stuff like that. So it's actually a harder outreach, in my opinion.
Interesting.
Not necessarily, less fruitful, just harder mentally and even emotionally, because you don't feel like you're making much progress or really doing anything Christian-y at all of what a mission trip would usually look like.
How do you... I know the Latin American family is very, very strong. how do families view, children or brothers, sisters, whoever, who go on mission?
They usually think we're crazy.
Okay.
It's,
Sometimes in the North, this is a common sentiment as well.
Yeah, I think that most parents who have missionary children think we're crazy, regardless of where you're from. But I think in Central America, probably in Mexico also, because we're really family-oriented. So in order to explain this, I mean, so I'm 27, but if I lived in Honduras, I would still live with my parents. Because my family is not as much as it used to be, but still somewhat a source of life. Like, they'll provide for my house, somewhat for housing, somewhat for food, stuff like that, where I don't have to worry about that. But it's also a cultural understanding that why would you move out before you're married?
Right.
Why would you spend money? Unless you go to a different city for work or for studying, right? But when I'm at home, I lived at home last year for an entire year. I was at home with my parents. It was hard for me, but that was the expected cultural thing, and there was no need for me to go against it. And so it's especially hard, especially for families who are very traditionally Latino. Traditionally, what has happened is that, let's say grandma and grandpa had a certain amount of land, not too big, not too small. Well, they had their house in the back.
Mm-hmm.
Then, let's say they had 3 children. Well, the children will make their houses on the same land of property, like on the same property, and so on and so forth, until there's literally no more space for anyone to build. And even so, you might start building up instead of moving away.
Right.
Because when you have children, grandma and grandpa or an aunt can take care of them. So why would you, we don't pay for nannies. That is the weirdest concept in the world. Because grandma or an aunt or an uncle can take care of them, right? So it's a very close-knit group of people that you see often, that you have to spend time with often, and it's pretty hard for our families because we're not even expected to leave home. For example, in my own family, my aunt lives with my grandma. Her children still live there. My cousins are about 26, 25. There is no foreseeable, they're not about to get married anytime soon, so they're not about to leave anytime soon. And even when they get married, they have to choose, are we going to live there or are we not? Some people still choose.
And if they move, they're probably not moving very far, I would assume.
No. Why would you do that? Right? Your mom is still going to cook for you. You still have...
point of contention.
Yeah. But in Latino culture, it's not as odd.
I say that's a point of contention because I have so many friends from Latin America, specifically Honduras, where they make the world's best tortillas, and no one has learned from their parents how to do this because they just eat their mother's tortillas because they're better.
Yeah, so why would you try to do something that's already really good?
That's true. But that also means I can't learn how to make these, and I want to.
One day, Brian.
Maybe.
But, yeah, so with family, it's hard. Even... And I think that it's hard not just to leave them. It's really hard to explain why you're leaving them. And that, to me, I think is the hardest part. Because I think that my family sometimes just sees this as they love Jesus, they're Christian, but sometimes they just see it as me being rebellious, going against the system, being the odd one out, and even, just not loving them as well as I should. Which is hard because that's not necessarily true.
Right. You just have a different calling on your life.
Yeah.
So, there are some Latinos going, and, in spite of all the challenges, the family, the finances, the visas, the mentality in the church and everything else, or the mentality maybe they grew up with, rather, the ones who make it, who go, how do they make it work?
We're not sure yet.
There's no established pattern.
I don't think there
Fair
is.
enough.
It's I will say that many of us do not rely on Latin America for our funding.
Okay.
So I'm trying to increase my funding from Central America, but it's harder.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, I mean, also for the time that I lived in the States, I have really deep friendships and people who care about me. So they invest in me. But I see it in several missionaries here who it's easier to, write that newsletter to a Canadian that has a better income than to write it to your cousin who's barely making ends meet.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think we're all still learning to ask in Central America because we want to be invested in from Central America. And I see it especially with some of the Costa Rican missionaries who don't have a lot of ties to foreigners. They struggle a lot and it's hard, and they're doing the best that they can, and they're the cheesy line of doing the possible so that God can do the impossible. And honestly, a lot of times they maybe raise $300 a month, maybe, usually about 200, and the Lord just in his kindness and faithfulness to them provides the rest. But it's stressful, and in my opinion it's really hard for that to be long-term sustainable. It's so stressful that you can't live like that forever. So many of us are learning, and I've seen especially the Latino men try to pick something up on the side, whether it's construction jobs or like some sort of trade. Like, for example, there's a couple of guys that make leather journals, sell them to the teams who come, and make a little bit of extra income, or have gotten pretty good at like buying things, trading things, selling things, and just kind of have to make something on the side in order to make ends meet. But I think that also that's in missions, our mentality is changing, because there are many countries that you can't come in as a normal missionary.
Right.
You have to come in with a job or profession or something that you can present to the government, right? So we're learning as we go, and I see more and more people who are starting to decide, actually I want to trade, or I want to be certified in something. For example, coffee. That is an easy way in right now because it's such a big fad.
Especially coming from Central America where there's a strong tradition,
And so people think, ooh, yeah, you can start a coffee shop. The business as mission movement is becoming bigger, and I think that we're still learning how to use that to our advantage. But from what I can see, and the people who are making it, we have a mixed source of income, so to speak, where every so often you'll translate, you'll do something on the side, and also receive income from, or funding from the North, Central America, and, trying to...
Just creative ways to make it work, huh?
Yeah. Be able to have a wider network, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited at the potential that I see for Latin American missionaries. I'm excited to see a lot of the new movements that are starting, the new agencies that are being started here, the expansion of the church even inside these countries. And so I think, in the next 50 years that we're going to see things really take off. And I'll tell you what I tell, every, Latino missionary is that, you don't just represent, yes, it's amazing that God is using you and bringing you overseas to represent the kingdom. But even more than that, there's a way in which you're providing an example to the church here, and to outsiders, and to other countries that also have the same tradition of, the great white missionary coming in and bringing it down from the mountain for everybody. You're setting an example that is just a different story. It's a different narrative, and it doesn't carry some of the baggage that we carry, even if that's not us personally. It doesn't matter. We're it's guilt by association, and so I'm excited to see the way in which, a lot of you young people who are taking this and are going and are braving, family opinions and money and the hassle of having to fly through Serbia to get somewhere instead of being able to connect on a flight through Houston, which is still baffling to me.
Yeah.
I think it's awesome the way that y'all are serving as hopefully changing the paradigm for some young 5, 6, 7, or 8 year old sitting on the pew. He's like, wait, there's this person who's going. Okay, maybe it is something I can do. So I could sit here and ask you questions about how to do this all day. That's my nature. But we've got a flight to catch, so we have to break it off there. So thank you for sharing. I can't wait to hear about when you get back. Maybe we'll update and add like a, something to this. So anyway, thank you, Evelyn.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you for coming.